Navy diver Ethan Brooks had logged 847 dives without incident, precision that earned him spots on the Navy's most secretive operations. But precision meant nothing when a Soviet pipe joint failed beneath him, triggering an explosion that flooded an abandoned underwater facility in 90 seconds. Trapped 200 feet below the Black Sea with 12 minutes of oxygen and no comms, Ethan faced one option: find air or die. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 hours earlier, Ethan sat in the briefing room of the USS Ramage, watching grainy satellite photos flicker across the screen. Commander Hayes stood at the front, arms crossed. Soviet underwater research facility, decommissioned 1987, Hayes said. 200 feet down, Black Sea, 12 miles off the Romanian coast. Intelligence suggests weapons research, maybe biological, but we need confirmation. He clicked to the next image. Your job is simple. Get in, photograph everything, retrieve any remaining documents, assess structural integrity, get out. 90 minutes max. Ethan studied the facility's layout. Massive structure, 6 levels, built into an underwater ridge. What's the condition? Unknown. Abandoned for 36 years. Expect corrosion, instability, the usual hazards. Hayes looked directly at him. This is reconnaissance, Brooks. No heroics. Never are, sir. Ethan turned to his dive partner, Marcus Chen, who was already running through equipment checks. Surface support is Torres on comms and Park on sonar, Hayes continued. They'll track you the entire dive. Any problems, you aboard immediately. Rachel Torres glanced up from her communication station. We'll keep the channel open. Standard check-ins every 10 minutes. David Park, the sonar operator, barely looked up from his screens. The kid was 24 and could hear things underwater that most people couldn't detect with machines. I'll have you on screen from entry to exit. Ethan appreciated the confidence but knew better than to trust technology in Soviet construction. What about structural surveys? Minimal, Hayes admitted. Romanian Navy did a remote sweep last month. Showed stable, but they didn't enter. Marcus looked up from checking his regulator. So we're the crash test dummies. You're the experts, Hayes corrected. That's why you're here. Ethan ran through his mental checklist. Equipment, triple-checked. Team, solid. Mission parameters, clear. He'd spent 12 years preparing for dives like this, learning that panic killed divers faster than equipment failure. Water temperature, Ethan asked. 45 degrees. You'll feel it even in the dry suits. Cold but manageable. Visibility. 15 feet on approach, worse inside. Bring extra lights. Marcus sealed his dive bag. When do we drop? Hayes checked his watch. 0600, 30 minutes. He looked at both of them. This should be routine. Make it routine. Ethan nodded, but something felt wrong. Not the mission parameters or the equipment. Something deeper, instinctive. The kind of feeling he'd learned to respect after 847 dives. He pushed it down. Feelings didn't matter. Training did. He was about to learn that sometimes feelings were training too. The water hit Ethan like a wall of ice. Even through the dry suit, the 45-degree Black Sea drove cold into his bones. He equalized pressure at 20 feet, then 40, then 60. Marcus descended beside him, bubbles streaming upward. Comms check, Rachel's voice crackled in his earpiece. Reading you both clear. Copy, Ethan said, descending to 100. The facility materialized below them. Massive corroded structure, half buried in sediment, covered in 36 years of marine growth. Hammer and sickle emblems still visible on the hull plates. Cyrillic warnings painted in faded red. Zapreksheno, forbidden. Getting visuals, Marcus said, his camera clicking. This thing is huge. 6 levels according to the schematics, each the size of a football field. The entrance was a moon pool on the facility's top level. Now it gaped open, dark and uninviting. Ethan checked his depth gauge. 180 feet. Tank gauge showing 3,000 psi. Enough air for 90 minutes at this depth. Entering moon pool. They swam through the opening into darkness. Their dive lights cut narrow beams through water that hadn't moved in decades. Visibility dropped to 10 feet. Silt swirled around them, obscuring everything beyond arm's reach. The interior was frozen in time. Desks bolted to floors, filing cabinets still closed, a coffee mug floating past. Personal effects drifted in the water. Photographs, documents, someone's glasses. You seeing this? Marcus aimed his camera at a workstation. Papers still pinned to a corkboard. What makes people just walk away? Orders, Ethan said. Rachel's voice. 10-minute check. Status. Level 3. Moving to documentation room, Ethan reported. No structural concerns yet. But he noticed the walls. Stress fractures in the concrete. Corrosion on pipe joints that looked worse than 36 years should cause. They navigated through flooded corridors using the schematic map laminated to Ethan's wrist. Left at the junction, down the companionway, through the laboratory section where beakers and test tubes still sat in racks. Marcus found the documentation room behind a door marked with a red star. Inside, waterproof containers lined the shelves. Jackpot, these seals held. Ethan swept his light across the room. Bag what you can carry. We're not making 2 trips. That's when he saw it. Fresh scoring on a pipe junction near the ceiling. Not 36 years of corrosion. Recent, sharp. He touched it with his gloved hand, felt the rough edge. Marcus, look at this. But Marcus was already loading containers into his bag. Ethan checked his pressure gauge. It trembled slightly, needle bouncing. He tapped it, still bouncing. Rachel, what's the pressure reading on your end? Static. Then her voice faint. Showing normal. Why? Getting fluctuations on my gauge. Could be instrument error. Could be. Ethan stared at the scored pipe junction. We should move to level 4, complete the sweep. Marcus sealed his bag. You worried about something. Always. Everything screamed wrong. The condition, the fresh scoring, the pressure fluctuations. But Hayes had ordered a complete assessment. Level 4 was the deepest accessible level. They descended. The water got colder, and in his earpiece, Rachel's voice started breaking up. Ethan, sonar picking. Something. Then nothing but static. Then the pipe joint failed. The explosion came from above and behind them. Ethan heard the crack first, sharp and metallic, like a gunshot underwater. Then the roar. Compressed gas igniting in a fireball that turned the water orange before the pressure wave hit. The blast threw Ethan backward into a bulkhead. His head slammed against the inside of his helmet. Stars exploded across his vision. Pain shot through his right shoulder. Dislocated. His regulator ripped free. Water rushed in, cold and choking. Training took over. Find the regulator. Purge it. Breathe. His hands fumbled. Fingers closing on the hose, jamming the mouthpiece back between his lips. He hit the purge button and expelled water. 1 breath. 2. The panic subsided. Metal screamed around him. The facility was collapsing. Debris rained through the water. Pipes, ceiling panels, equipment. A filing cabinet tumbled past, missing his head by inches. The corridor filled with silt, turning visibility to 0. Marcus! Ethan shouted into his comm. Static. Marcus, respond. Nothing. He activated his dive light. The beam cut through darkness, revealing a nightmare. The corridor had collapsed 20 feet behind him, ceiling and floor meeting in a twisted mass of metal. The passage back to the moon pool was gone. Movement caught his eye. A flash of light disappearing around a corner. Marcus's light heading in the opposite direction. Ethan tried to swim after it, but his body wouldn't respond. His right arm hung useless, shoulders screaming with pain. Marcus! He pushed forward, kicking with his legs, pulling himself along the wall with his left hand. The light was gone. The corridor ahead showed more collapse, debris blocking the path. Ethan's training whispered, stop, assess, react. Swimming blindly into collapsed corridors would kill him. He needed to think. He checked his gauges. The primary tank showed damage. Dented, pressure dropping fast. 2,000 psi and falling. The secondary tank had ruptured completely. He shut off the valve, conserving what remained in the primary. At this depth, 2,000 psi gave him maybe 12 minutes. His communications unit was dead. The headset ripped away, the backup unit crushed. He tried the emergency beacon on his belt. The light blinked red 3 times and went dark. Damaged, no signal. Ethan forced himself to breathe slowly. In for 4 seconds, out for 4 seconds. Slowing his heart rate, reducing oxygen consumption. Every breath mattered. He was trapped on level 4 of a collapsing Soviet facility, 200 feet underwater, with 12 minutes of air and no way to call for help. Marcus was somewhere in the facility, possibly injured, possibly dead. The route back was blocked. Find air or die. Those were his options. He needed trapped air pockets, spaces where air had been sealed when the facility flooded years ago, compressed by water pressure but still breathable. He'd trained for this scenario, but training pools didn't have collapsing ceilings and zero visibility and the crushing weight of knowing you might die in 10 minutes. Ethan chose a direction, not the blocked corridor where Marcus's light had disappeared, not back toward the moon pool. Forward, deeper into the facility, toward the central ventilation shaft where air pockets were most likely to exist. He broke his first glow stick and left it at the junction, green light marking the spot. Then he swam into the black water, counting his breaths, watching his air gauge drop, and praying that somewhere ahead there was enough air to keep him alive until rescue arrived. If rescue arrived. Ethan's tank gauge read 1,800 psi when he found the first air pocket, 10 minutes into the crisis. Every corridor looked the same in the darkness, every junction another decision that could mean life or death. The ventilation shaft appeared exactly where the schematic said it would be, 20 feet wide, lined with pipes running vertical through the facility's levels. Some pipes had broken in the explosion, jagged metal edges jutting into the water. Others remained intact, offering handholds. He surfaced slowly into a gap between pipes and ceiling. His helmet broke through water into air, real air, stale and compressed and tasting of rust, but breathable. The pocket was maybe 2 feet tall, 6 feet across. Ethan yanked off his regulator and sucked in a breath that didn't come from a tank. His lungs expanded fully for the first time since the blast. The air was thin, pressure compressed, but his body didn't care. He floated there, head tilted back, and forced himself to think past the relief. This pocket wouldn't last. Water pressure was slowly compressing it. Maybe an hour before this space became too small to breathe in. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. The joint was definitely dislocated. He could feel the ball sitting wrong in the socket. Moving his right arm sent lightning bolts of pain through his chest. Ethan checked his tank. 1,500 psi. He'd been breathing from the pocket for 2 minutes, conserving tank air. If he could find more pockets like this, he could extend his survival time. Ration the tank for swimming. Use trapped air for breathing. He studied the space. The ventilation shaft continued up and down. Above led to level 3, completely blocked by the collapse. Below led to level 5, deeper into the facility. More dangerous but more likely to have sealed spaces with trapped air. A sound echoed through the pipes. Metallic tapping, rhythmic and distant. 3 short taps. Pause. 3 long taps. Pause. 3 short taps. SOS. Marcus. Ethan's heart jumped. His dive partner was alive, signaling. The taps came again, vibrating through the pipe network. Ethan grabbed his dive knife and tapped back. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Then, tap, tap, pause, tap. Acknowledgement. The tapping stopped, then started again. Same pattern, but from a different direction. Marcus was moving. Ethan wanted to go after him. Every instinct screamed to find his partner, but his training whispered something else. Going after Marcus meant using precious air to swim through collapsed corridors with no guarantee of finding him. The calculus was brutal but clear. Stay alive first. Signal your location. Let rescue find you. He checked his gauge again. 1,300 psi. He looked at the water below, black and cold. Then at the air pocket above, already shrinking. He made his decision. Find a bigger air pocket, something stable enough to survive in for hours. Signal from there. Make enough noise that David's sonar could detect him. Stay alive long enough for rescue. He took 6 deep breaths from the pocket, hyperventilating slightly to saturate his blood with oxygen. Then he donned his regulator and descended back into the flooded shaft. The radio room was 3 levels down. If any space in this facility had trapped air, it would be there. Sealed doors, enclosed spaces designed to stay dry. He broke a yellow glow stick and dropped it in the shaft. Second marker. Then he kicked toward level 7. The descent took 4 minutes and cost him 300 psi. Ethan's gauge read 1,000 when he reached level 7. 8 minutes of air left. His lungs already ached from the slow, deliberate breaths. 4 seconds in, hold, 4 seconds out. Level 7 was worse than the levels above. The explosion had triggered cascade failure. Ceiling panels hung loose. Electrical conduits dangled. A door had been ripped completely off its hinges. Ethan pulled himself through the debris field using his left hand and his fins. His right arm he kept tucked against his chest. Every bump sent fresh agony through the dislocated shoulder. The corridor ahead split into 3 branches. Left led to crew quarters, small rooms, possible air pockets, but time-consuming. Center led to the equipment bay, unlikely to have trapped air. Right led to the communications section. The radio room, spaces designed to be sealed. Right. Ethan kicked toward the right corridor and saw the problem. A section of ceiling had collapsed across the passage, creating a gap maybe 18 inches tall. He'd have to squeeze through with his tank, with his injured shoulder. He had no choice. Going back meant death. He exhaled completely, emptying his lungs. Then he pushed his tank through first, angling it sideways. The metal scraped against concrete. He pulled himself forward, leading with his good shoulder. Halfway through, his tank caught on something, a piece of rebar hooked into his harness. Ethan pulled harder. The rebar held. He was stuck, wedged in a gap 18 inches tall, 190 feet underwater, with 7 minutes of air. Don't panic. Never panic. He forced himself to stop pulling, reached back with his left hand, found the rebar. It had snagged the emergency release clip. He tried to unhook it. The clip wouldn't budge. Ethan checked his gauge. 900 psi, 6 minutes. He gripped the rebar and twisted his body, rotating his shoulders to change the angle. His right shoulder joint ground and shifted. White light exploded across his vision. He bit down on his regulator to keep from screaming. The tank moved. Slightly, not enough. He twisted again, harder, and the pain was so intense that his vision tunneled. But the tank pulled free, the rebar releasing with a metallic scrape. Ethan dragged himself through the gap and collapsed on the other side, breathing too fast. His gauge read 700 psi. 4 minutes. He could see the radio room door. 30 feet ahead, marked with Cyrillic letters and a red star. The door was closed. Closed meant sealed. Sealed meant possible air pocket. Ethan kicked toward it, his injured arm dangling, his good arm pulling him forward. The door's wheel lock was corroded but intact. He grabbed it and pulled. Nothing. The wheel wouldn't turn. 300 psi. 2 minutes of air. Ethan wedged his dive knife into the wheel mechanism and used it as a lever. The corrosion cracked. The wheel moved. 1 inch. 2 inches. He pulled harder, his shoulder muscles tearing, his fingers going numb. The wheel turned. The door seal broke with a rush of pressure. Water surged past him, and Ethan let it carry him inside. He surfaced and hit his head on a ceiling. Air. He'd found air. The air pocket in the radio room was massive. 3 feet of headspace, stretching across the entire room. Ethan ripped off his regulator and sucked in breath after breath, his body shaking. His tank gauge read 100 psi. Empty. He unclipped his harness and let the cylinders sink. The weight dropped away. He activated his dive light and swept it across the space. Soviet-era radio sets, headsets hanging from hooks, a large console, and pipes. Dozens of pipes running along the ceiling and walls, connecting this room to every other level. Perfect. Ethan grabbed his dive knife. He reached up and tapped it against the nearest pipe. The sound rang out clear and metallic. 3 short taps. 3 long taps. 3 short taps. SOS. He waited 30 seconds and tapped again. Same pattern. David on the surface would be monitoring sonar. The pipe taps would read as rhythmic pings, artificial, deliberate. Ethan tapped for 2 minutes, then paused to rest. His left shoulder was cramping, and his right shoulder was beyond pain. He needed to relocate the joint. Ethan found a protruding pipe at shoulder height. He positioned his right arm against it, elbow bent. This was the technique they taught him, external rotation against a fixed point. He took 3 deep breaths. Then he rotated his torso away from the pipe, using his body weight to pull the arm into position. The humeral head shifted, ground against bone. Then, pop, the joint relocated. Pain exploded white-hot through his shoulder. He grabbed the pipe with his left hand to keep from sinking, but his arm was back in the socket. He could move it. The range of motion was limited, the joint swollen but functional. Both hands. Better odds. Ethan resumed tapping. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, over and over. Each strike sending vibrations through the facility, through the water, up toward the surface where Rachel and David and Commander Hayes would be coordinating rescue. He just had to stay alive long enough to be found. The waterline crept higher. The air pocket was compressing. Ethan did the math. The room was maybe 15 feet square. Water level at 9 feet. Air pocket 3 feet deep. That gave him approximately 675 cubic feet of air. At rest, he'd consume about 0.4 cubic feet per minute. That meant roughly 28 hours of air. But that was at rest. Any exertion would increase consumption. Cold would increase consumption. And the pocket was compressing. Realistically, he had maybe 12 to 16 hours before the air became unbreathable. Ethan kept tapping. The sound echoed through the darkness. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. I'm here. I'm alive. Come find me. 200 feet above him, on the USS Ramage, David Park pressed his headphones tighter against his ears. The sonar screen showed nothing but noise, collapsing metal, shifting debris, the chaotic acoustic signature of a facility tearing itself apart. Anything, Rachel asked, leaning over his station. Negative. Too much interference. David adjusted the filters, trying to isolate patterns from the chaos. If they're signaling, I can't hear it through all this. Commander Hayes stood behind them, arms crossed. How long until we can deploy rescue divers? Cutting teams prepping now, Rachel said. But sir, we don't know where exactly they are. The facility's 6 levels. Could take hours to search every section. Hayes' jaw tightened. Then we start searching. This story takes time to craft. If you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hour 3. Ethan's hands were going numb. Not from cold, though the water was still 45 degrees, but from the repetitive motion of striking pipe with knife. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, 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 tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. His wrist ached, his fingers cramped, but he kept tapping because stopping meant giving up. The waterline had risen 6 inches since he'd entered the radio room. The air pocket that had been 3 feet tall was now 2.5 feet. Simple physics. Water pressure at this depth was compressing every cubic foot of air as more water displaced it. Ethan had done the math 3 times. At the current rate, he had maybe 10 hours before the pocket shrank to the point where he'd have to tilt his head back just to keep his nose above water. 12 hours before it became unbreathable, unless rescue arrived first. He paused his tapping and listened. The facility groaned around him, metal settling and shifting. Somewhere distant, something collapsed, a muffled boom that vibrated through the water. Don't think about Marcus. Think about the next tap, the next signal. Ethan resumed tapping, his stomach cramped with hunger. He hadn't eaten since the pre-dive meal 6 hours ago. Thirst was worse. His mouth tasted of salt water and rubber. His throat was raw. The air pocket was so dry that every breath seemed to suck moisture from his tissues. He had no water, no food, no way to signal except the pipes. Ethan forced those thoughts down. Survival was mental as much as physical. The instructors had drilled that into him during dive training. Your body can endure far more than your mind believes. The cold was the biggest threat now. His core temperature had to be dropping despite the dry suit. He could feel it in his movements, sluggish and imprecise. Hypothermia was insidious. Rest was death. Ethan kept tapping, to stay awake, to stay warm, to signal. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. He switched the knife to his left hand, giving his right a break. Left-handed strikes weren't as strong, but they maintained the pattern. Somewhere above him, 200 feet of black water away, rescue teams were searching. He had to believe that. They wouldn't abandon him. But the facility was massive. 6 levels, dozens of rooms per level. They could search for days and never find him if they started in the wrong section, unless they heard the tapping. Ethan struck the pipe harder. The sound rang out clear and sharp, vibrating through the metal network, traveling through water that conducted sound 4 times faster than air. Hour 3 became hour 4. The tapping continued. Ethan's mind started to drift, catching himself mid-pattern. He shook his head, forced focus, started the pattern over. Stay awake. Keep signaling. Trust the team. Survive. Hour 6 brought hallucinations. Ethan saw his father standing in the water beside him, dive mask on, gesturing toward the door. The voice was so clear that Ethan almost responded before he remembered his father had been dead for 3 years. He blinked hard. The apparition disappeared. Just cold and exhaustion playing tricks. Hypothermia messing with his perception. Ethan kept tapping. The rhythm had become automatic. His right hand was back on the knife. He'd been alternating every 30 minutes. Both shoulders screamed. Both wrists were swollen. His fingers had gone past numb into a tingling sensation that meant nerve damage or cold injury. The waterline was at his chin now. He had to tread water constantly to keep his mouth and nose in the air. That burned calories he couldn't afford, but also increased his oxygen consumption. He checked his dive watch. 14:30 hours. 6.5 hours since the explosion. 13 hours since he'd last eaten. 7 hours since he'd had water. His tongue was thick in his mouth. A sound broke through his tapping, different from the settling groans. Sharp, metallic, rhythmic. Ethan stopped and listened. There it was again. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Coming from the pipes, but not his pipes. Marcus. It had to be Marcus. The taps were faint, distant, but unmistakable. Deliberate. Human. Ethan struck his pipe in response. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Then, tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. I hear you. The distant tapping stopped. Ethan waited. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Then the response came. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. Acknowledgement. Relief flooded through Ethan's chest. Marcus was alive. Injured probably. Trapped definitely. But alive and signaling. They were both still fighting. Ethan resumed his SOS pattern with renewed energy. The pain didn't matter. The cold didn't matter. Someone else was out there, fighting the same fight. 2 divers tapping Morse code into flooded Soviet pipes, betting everything that someone above them was listening. The waterline crept higher. The air pocket was maybe 18 inches tall now. Ethan had to float on his back, head tilted to keep his face clear. His legs were cramping. His core temperature had dropped low enough that he'd stopped shivering. A bad sign. He kept tapping anyway. On the USS Ramage, David Parks stared at his sonar screen with burning eyes. 7 hours of monitoring acoustic signatures, trying to separate signal from noise. His supervisor had told him to take a break 3 hours ago. He'd refused because he'd heard something, not clear enough to call it a pattern yet, but something rhythmic, something artificial. Rachel, he said quietly, come look at this. Rachel Torres moved to his station. What am I looking at? David played back the last 10 minutes of recordings, audio enhanced and filtered. There, a series of pings, faint but regular, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, repeating every 30 seconds. That's not structural settling, Rachel breathed. That's SOS. Been going for at least 2 hours, David said. I just isolated it from the background noise. He adjusted the bearing calculations. Coming from level 7, interior section, near the communications array. Rachel grabbed the radio. Commander Hayes, we've got him. David's got a signal. Brooks is alive and he's signaling. Hour 8. The water was at Ethan's nose now. He had to tilt his head straight back, mouth pointed at the ceiling, to breathe. The air pocket had compressed to maybe 10 inches. Another 2 hours, 3 at most, and he'd be breathing water. His thoughts kept sliding sideways, losing track of what he was doing. His fingers barely responded. His legs had gone numb. A new sound penetrated his awareness. Mechanical, distant but growing louder. Ethan stopped tapping and listened. There, a high-pitched whine, muffled but unmistakable. Cutting equipment. The rescue team had breached the facility. They were inside. Energy surged through Ethan's exhausted body. They were coming. He struck the pipe with renewed force. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Louder now, faster, making as much noise as possible to guide them in. The cutting sound grew closer. Ethan could hear voices now. Shouts, commands. They were in the facility, somewhere above him, maybe 1 level up. But they were moving slowly. The cutting equipment could only burn through so much steel per minute, and Soviet construction was over-engineered. Thick plates, reinforced beams. Ethan checked his watch. 16:30 hours, 8 hours, 40 minutes since the explosion. He looked at the waterline. 9 inches of air left. Maybe 90 minutes before the pocket became too small to breathe from. The rescue team was close, 1 level up, maybe 200 feet away. But if they had to cut through multiple bulkheads, it could take another 2 hours. The air would run out first. He kept tapping anyway. The cutting sounds grew louder, voices clearer. A shout. Sonar bearing puts him straight ahead. 200 feet. Rachel's voice over a radio. Brooks, if you can hear this, keep signaling. We're almost there. Ethan tapped harder, faster. The waterline touched his upper lip. He tilted his head back, breathing through his nose, and kept tapping with his arm underwater. 7 inches of air. 6. 5. The cutting sounds were right outside now. Metal screaming as thermal lances burned through the wheel mechanism. 4 inches of air. 3. Breach in 10 seconds, someone shouted. 2 inches. Ethan's mouth went under. He breathed through his nose, face pressed against the ceiling, and kept tapping. The door exploded inward with a rush of pressure and light. Dive lights, voices, hands grabbing him. We got him! We got him! Medic! Ethan let the knife fall from his numb fingers. Let the rescue divers pull him toward the door, toward fresh air and safety. He'd made it. 8 hours and 47 minutes of tapping, and he'd made it. Commander Hayes arrived at the sonar station 30 seconds after Rachel's call. He studied the acoustic signature on David's screen, watching the rhythmic pattern repeat. 3 short pings, 3 long, 3 short, clear as day once you knew what to listen for. How long has he been signaling? Hayes asked. At least 2 hours continuously, David said. Probably longer. The pattern's been consistent. Same interval, same duration. He's following protocol to the letter. Hayes picked up the radio. Rescue team, this is Hayes. We have positive acoustic contact with Brooks. Level 7 communication section. Bearing 247 from your current position, approximately 200 feet. The team leader's voice crackled back. Copy that, Commander. We're cutting through the main bulkhead now. Estimate 30 minutes to reach his position. Make it 20, Hayes said. And team leader, when you breach that door, you move fast. He's been down there almost 9 hours. He won't have much left. Rachel leaned over the console. David, can you tell if the signal's getting weaker? David adjusted the filters, isolating the most recent pings. Hard to say. There's so much interference. But the interval's staying consistent, every 30 seconds, like clockwork. That's good. Means he's still conscious, still following training. What about Chen? Hayes asked. Any signal from him? Negative, David said. Just Brooks, 1 diver, 1 signal source. Hayes nodded slowly. Marcus Chen was either unconscious, dead, or trapped somewhere the sonar couldn't penetrate. But Brooks was alive. That's what mattered right now. 1 rescue at a time. The rescue divers moved fast. 2 of them grabbed Ethan under his arms and pulled him through the radio room door. His legs wouldn't work. 8 hours of treading water had turned his muscles into dead weight. Brooks, can you hear me? Stay with us. The voice belonged to Chief Petty Officer Mike Reeves, lead rescue diver. Marcus, Ethan croaked. Marcus is signaling. Heard him. Different section. We'll find him, Reeves said. Thompson, get a regulator on him. Another diver pressed a regulator to Ethan's mouth. Fresh air flooded his lungs. Real air. Compressed and clean. Core temp 87 degrees, Thompson said, checking a monitor. Severe hypothermia range. Get him in the basket, Reeves ordered. They strapped Ethan into a rescue basket and secured the straps. The team began swimming, pulling the basket through flooded corridors. Ethan watched the ceiling pass above him, Soviet pipework streaming by in the glare of dive lights. He couldn't tell if they'd been moving for 30 seconds or 30 minutes. They reached the vertical shaft where the cutting team had breached through. A makeshift elevator system had been rigged, cables and pulleys anchored to structural beams. Lifting now, Reeves said into his comm. Tell topside we're coming up with one survivor. Have medical standing by. The basket jerked upward. Ethan felt the pressure change as they ascended. Level 7 to level 6, level 6 to level 5. At level 3, they stopped. A diver wrapped an emergency blanket around him, tucking it into the straps. How's he doing? Alive, Reeves said. That's all that counts. They continued upward. Ethan could see the moon pool above them now, the surface, but his body wasn't responding. The hypothermia had progressed too far. His extremities were numb. His vision was tunneling. He could hear voices but couldn't process the words. The basket broke the surface. Hands grabbed it, pulling it onto the deck of a rescue vessel. Ethan saw stars above him, real stars in a real sky. Get him inside now. Move, move, move. They carried him across the deck. Ethan caught a glimpse of the ramage 100 yards away, lit up. They hadn't given up on Marcus. The medical bay doors opened. Warmth hit Ethan's face from heaters running at full blast. They transferred him to a treatment table. Someone cut away his dry suit. Someone else started an IV. A third person wrapped heated blankets around his torso. Core temp 86.5, a medic announced. Heart rate 42. Blood pressure 90/60. Doc Chen appeared in Ethan's field of vision. Ethan, you hear me. Squeeze my hand. Ethan tried. His fingers twitched, but didn't close. Don't worry, Chen said. Your body's shutting down peripheral function to protect your core. We're going to warm you up slowly. Marcus, he whispered. Chen leaned closer. What about Marcus? Still, signaling. Level 5, maybe level 6. Heard him. Tapping. Chen turned to someone. Get that to Commander Hayes immediately. Brooks says Chen's alive and signaling from level 5 or 6. The warming process took 3 hours. They couldn't rush it. Raising core temperature too quickly could trigger cardiac arrest. Doc Chen monitored every decimal point, adjusting the heated blankets and warm IV fluids with precise care. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he was in the medical bay. Sometimes he was back in the radio room, water rising, the knife striking the pipe. At hour 2, his core temperature hit 92 degrees, the critical threshold. Chen smiled when the monitor beeped the reading. You're going to make it, Brooks. Ethan's jaw was still locked from shivering. The tremors had started about 30 minutes ago, violent, uncontrollable shaking as his body tried to generate heat. But Chen said it was a good sign. Commander Hayes entered at hour 2.5. He stood at the foot of the treatment table. Hell of a job down there, Brooks, Hayes said. 8 hours of signaling. That's why we found you. David picked up your pattern on sonar. Ethan nodded. Marcus. Still searching. You said you heard him signaling. Level 5 or 6, Ethan said. Different pattern. 3 evenly spaced taps, repeating. Not SOS. Just letting me know he was alive. When? Hour 6, maybe hour 7. Hayes pulled out a tablet with the facility schematic. Show me where you were when you heard it. Ethan traced a path with his finger. Radio room here. Sound came from northwest. Maybe 100 feet away. Hayes zoomed in. That's the crew quarters section on level 6. Smaller rooms, sealed compartments, good places for air pockets. He made notes. We've got teams there now. He's alive, Ethan said. He tapped back. Acknowledge my signal. Rachel Torres appeared in the doorway, eyes red from exhaustion. "Commander, David's picking up something on sonar. Faint, intermittent, but it's coming from level 6 crew quarters." Hayes turned back to Ethan. "The pattern you heard, how long between each set?" "Maybe 10 seconds, maybe 15, like he was conserving energy." Hayes nodded. "Smart. Less exertion means less oxygen consumption." He headed for the door. "Brooks, you did good." "Sir," Ethan called, "when you find him, tell him I never stopped tapping." "I'll tell him." Chen checked Ethan's temperature. 94.2 degrees. "You're almost out of the woods." "I can't rest," Ethan said. "Not until Marcus is out." A commotion outside cut him off. Voices shouting. Then the PA system crackled. "Medical team to rescue vessel Alpha. Second survivor recovered. Core temp critical. Multiple injuries. ETA 3 minutes. Chen grabbed his kit and headed for the door. "Stay put." But Ethan was already trying to sit up. Marcus was out. The medics rolled a gurney past it a run. Ethan caught a glimpse of Marcus's face. Pale, unconscious, oxygen mask on, but alive. Ethan lay back, his body finally relaxing. The shaking subsided. His temperature climbed to 95 degrees. They'd both made it. Against impossible odds, they'd both survived. Marcus regained consciousness 40 minutes later. Doc Chen appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Your dive partner's awake, asking for you." Ethan was already sitting up. His core temperature had reached 96.8 degrees. The shivering had stopped. "I can walk." "You can shuffle," Chen corrected, "and I'm going with you." They made it to Marcus's treatment room in slow steps. Marcus lay on a table wrapped in heated blankets, IV lines in both arms. His left leg was immobilized in a splint. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. "You look like hell," Marcus said. "You look worse," Ethan replied. They stared at each other. Then Marcus smiled. "I heard you tapping," Marcus said. "Must have been hour 5, maybe 6. Thought I was hallucinating. Then I realized that's SOS. That's Ethan." "I heard you too," Ethan said. "Your 3-tap pattern." Marcus nodded. "Couldn't maintain full SOS. Too much exertion, too little air. Figured 3 taps every 15 seconds was enough." "It was," Ethan said. "David heard both of us. Used our signals to triangulate positions." Chen checked Marcus's monitors. "Core temps at 94.6. You're doing good." "What did I go through?" Marcus asked. "Everything after the explosion is fuzzy." Ethan sat beside the table. "Explosion hit us from behind. You went one direction, I went the other. I ended up in the radio room on level 7. You. Equipment storage on level 6, Marcus said. Found myself in total darkness. Tank gauge showing 400 psi. Found a pocket, maybe 2 feet of headspace. How long did your air last? 7 hours, maybe. Started getting hard to breathe around hour 8. I remember tapping, then nothing. You did die, Chen said. Technically. Your heart stopped for 45 seconds when we pulled you out. We got you back with CPR and an AED shock. Marcus processed that. 45 seconds dead, new personal record. Don't make a habit of it, Ethan said. Commander Hayes entered. The mission changed the second that pipe joint failed. Your job became staying alive. You both succeeded. He sat down. And we did retrieve some intel. Your bag was wedged in the corridor near where we found you, Chen. 3 containers survived intact. How long until we're cleared for duty? Ethan asked. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You nearly froze to death 2 hours ago, and you're asking about duty clearance. I need to know the timeline. Minimum 2 weeks medical leave, probably 4, plus psych evaluation. He stood. I'll want full debriefs when you're recovered. But that can wait. He headed for the door. One more thing. The Navy's recommending both of you for commendation. What you did down there, that's what we train for, but hope we never have to use. After Hayes left, Ethan stood to head back to his room. Marcus called after him. Hey, Ethan. Yeah. Thanks for keeping that signal going. Knowing you were alive, that's what kept me tapping. Same, Ethan said. We got each other home. Doc Chen returned an hour later with final test results. Your blood work's back. Both of you are showing elevated white blood cell counts. Normal immune response to extreme stress. Kidney function slightly impaired from the hypothermia, but nothing permanent. Should normalize within 48 hours. He checked their charts. You're both incredibly lucky. 8 and 9 hours in those conditions. Most people wouldn't have made it past 4. What made the difference? Marcus asked. Training mostly, Chen said. You both knew how to slow your breathing, conserve energy, manage panic. That bought you time. And the dry suits, even damaged, they provided enough insulation to keep you on the edge of survivable instead of dead. Without those suits, you'd have been hypothermic in 2 hours, dead in 4. Ethan thought about that. The suit he'd cursed for being heavy and restrictive had saved his life. Every piece of equipment, every protocol, every training drill, it had all mattered in those 9 hours. 3 weeks later, Ethan sat in his apartment in Virginia Beach, staring at the dive gear hanging in his closet. The equipment had been returned 2 days ago after the Navy finished its investigation. His dry suit had been patched where the explosion tore it. His dive knife, the one he'd used to tap out SOS for 8 hours, had been cleaned and sharpened. But Ethan hadn't touched any of it. The nightmares had started on day 4 of recovery. Always the same. Water rising, air disappearing, the knife falling from numb fingers just as rescue arrived. He'd wake up gasping, convinced he was still in that radio room. The psych evaluation had cleared him for duty, technically, but the therapist had added a note. Recommend gradual return to diving operations. Gradual. Ethan Brooks didn't do gradual. He'd built a career on being the first in the water, the last out, the guy who never hesitated. Now he was hesitating. His phone rang. Marcus. You watching the news? Marcus asked. Ethan turned on the TV. CNN was running a segment about the mission, declassified. The anchor was talking about 2 Navy divers who survived 9 hours trapped in a flooded Soviet facility. They're calling us heroes, Marcus said. We were just doing the job, Ethan replied. You coming to the ceremony next week. Admiral wants to personally present the commendations. I'll be there. You sound thrilled. I haven't dived since we got back, Ethan said quietly. Silence then. Me neither. You're still recovering. Broken leg, cardiac arrest. You've got an excuse. So do you. Severe hypothermia, dislocated shoulder, 8 hours of psychological hell. Marcus paused. I've been talking to the therapist twice a week. She says it's normal to have second thoughts. I don't have time to process, Ethan said. I'm a Navy diver. If I can't dive, I'm nothing. That's bullshit and you know it. Ethan walked to the window. The apartment had a partial view of the ocean. He'd chosen this place because of the water. Now the sight made his chest tight. What if I freeze up down there? Then you surface, but you won't know until you try. The doorbell rang. Rachel Torres stood in the hallway holding 2 coffees. Someone's at my door, Ethan said. I'll call you back. It's Rachel. I told her where you lived. Ethan opened the door. Rachel walked past him, set both coffees on the counter, and looked around. The place was immaculate, too immaculate. You're spiraling, Rachel said. I've seen it before. Good operators who survive something impossible and then convince themselves they can't do it anymore. I'm being realistic. Realistic would be acknowledging that you survived through skill and determination. What you're doing is catastrophizing. Ethan picked up one of the coffees. Rachel had been his communications officer for 3 years. She knew him. David wants to see you, Rachel said. He's been analyzing the acoustic data from the rescue. Says there's something he wants to show you. What about them? He wouldn't tell me. She finished her coffee. He's at the base. Office hours until 1700. You should go. After Rachel left, Ethan stared at the dive gear. Then he grabbed his keys. Maybe David had answers. David Park's office was walls covered with acoustic charts, 3 monitors displaying waveform data, empty coffee cups everywhere. David looked up when Ethan knocked. Ethan, good. He gestured to a chair. I've been analyzing the sonar data, specifically the acoustic signatures you and Marcus were generating. David pulled up waveforms on his center monitor. This is your SOS pattern. 3 short strikes, 3 long strikes, 3 short strikes, repeating every 30 seconds for 8 hours and 47 minutes. Total number of complete patterns, 1,054. Ethan stared at the screen. Seeing it visualize the consistent peaks and valleys made it real, evidence that he'd fought. Here's what's interesting, David said, pulling up a second waveform. This is Marcus's pattern. 3 evenly spaced strikes repeating every 15 seconds. He maintained it for approximately 7 hours. But look at this. David overlaid both waveforms. Where they intersected, the patterns created a harmonic interference pattern. You were creating a beacon, David said. 2 separate signals that, when combined, amplified each other. That's why I was able to isolate your position so quickly. The sonar was detecting a composite acoustic signature that stood out from the background noise. We didn't plan that, Ethan said. No, but your training did. Both of you defaulted to rhythmic, consistent signaling. That consistency created the amplification. David leaned back. The odds of survival in your situation were maybe 5%, but you turned them into 100% through training. Ethan studied the waveforms, 1,054 complete patterns. That meant he'd struck that pipe 3,162 times. Even when his fingers were numb, his shoulder was screaming, his mind was hallucinating. Why are you showing me this? Ethan asked. Because Rachel said you were questioning whether you could dive again. David pointed at the screen. This is proof that even in the worst possible scenario, you didn't freeze. You executed for almost 9 hours straight. That's not luck, that's skill. It felt like luck. You were one mistake away from dying, David said, but you didn't make that mistake. You made the right choices consistently for 9 hours. Ethan stood and walked to the window. The base stretched out below, divers training. This was his world, had been his world for 12 years. What if I go down there and I remember the radio room? Ethan said. Then you'll surface, or you'll push through it. David joined him. You want to know what I heard in those recordings? A man who refused to quit. Every 30 seconds, like clockwork, that signal came through. That's who you are. Marcus is going back in the water next month, David said. Physical therapy says his leg will be healed enough for shallow dives. He's nervous too, but he's doing it anyway. Ethan turned away from the window. The waveforms were still on the monitor, those 1,054 patterns marching across the screen, evidence that he'd survived. When's the ceremony? Ethan asked. Next Friday. Will there be press? Probably. Why? Because if I'm going to accept a commendation for surviving that facility, I need to prove I'm still the diver who went into it. David smiled. You're going to dive again. I'm going to try, Ethan corrected. 2 days before the ceremony, Ethan drove to the base dive facility at dawn. The pool was empty, the water still and clear. He'd arranged for private access, just him and the water. He suited up slowly, checking every piece of equipment twice. Dry suit, tank, full, 3,000 psi. Regulator, mask, fins, weight belt. Ethan sat on the edge of the pool, fins dangling in the water. 10 feet deep, heated to 72 degrees, emergency ladder 10 feet away. Nothing like the Black Sea, but his chest was tight anyway. He put the regulator in his mouth and took a breath. The sound was the same. That hollow, mechanical inhale that had become the soundtrack to 8 hours of survival. He closed his eyes and immediately saw the radio room. Ethan opened his eyes and pulled the regulator out. His hands were shaking. This was a pool, a safe, shallow pool. There was no danger here, except he was afraid, and that made him angry. He'd spent 12 years mastering fear, 12 years learning to control his breathing, manage his adrenaline, think clearly under pressure. He'd earned 847 dives without incident because he never let fear make decisions. Now fear was making all the decisions. Ethan walked to the equipment shed, found a length of pipe about 6 feet long, metal, similar to the ones in the Soviet facility. He submerged it, letting it sink to the bottom. Then he put his regulator back in his mouth and slipped into the water. The descent was immediate panic. Water closing over his head, pressure in his ears. Every instinct screamed to surface. But Ethan forced himself down. 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet. His fins touched the bottom. The pipe was in front of him. He pulled his dive knife from its sheath. His hand was shaking. He raised the knife and struck the pipe. The sound rang through the water, sharp, metallic, exactly like it had sounded in the radio room. Ethan's vision tunneled. His breathing spiked. He was back there. Level 7, water rising. He forced air into his lungs. 4 seconds in. Hold. 4 seconds out. The technique that had kept him alive for 8 hours. He struck the pipe again. 3 short strikes. The panic was still there, but he pushed through it. 3 long strikes. His breathing steadied slightly. 3 short strikes. SOS. The pattern he'd executed 1,054 times. Ethan repeated the pattern. Then again. Then again. Each time the panic receded. Each time his breathing came easier. This wasn't the Soviet facility. This was a pool. He wasn't trapped. He wasn't dying. He was training. After 5 minutes, the shaking stopped. After 10 minutes, his breathing was normal. After 15 minutes, he'd been underwater longer than his planned test dive, and he wasn't panicking. He surfaced slowly, broke through to morning air, and pulled off his mask. The sun was higher now. He'd done it. He'd gone underwater, faced the memory, and come back up. It wasn't perfect. The panic had been real, but he'd pushed through it. His phone buzzed. Text from Marcus. Heard you were at the pool this morning. How'd it go? Ethan typed back. I didn't drown. Marcus's response. That's the spirit. Same time tomorrow. Ethan looked at the pool, at the pipe on the bottom, at his dive gear beside him. Tomorrow he'd go deeper, stay down longer. Same time tomorrow, he typed. The ceremony was in 2 days. By then, he needed to be ready to stand in front of an admiral and accept a commendation for something that still gave him nightmares. Ethan gathered his gear. The water had been cold. His hands were wrinkled. His shoulder ached. But he felt better than he had in 3 weeks. The darkness hadn't won. The fear hadn't won. He'd gone back in the water and come out alive. That was everything. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment and share it. It helps the next person find their way here.